Welcome to the Department of Grant Compliance and Administration's statewide training. Today's training topic is Private Schools Equitable Services Program Overview. Greetings. I am Lenitra Guess in the Federal Program Compliance Division at the Texas Education Agency. I am the state's private nonprofit ombudsman for equitable services. Today's presentation will provide participants a private nonprofit program overview of the Every Student Succeeds Act requirements for equitable services. This presentation is intended solely to provide general information and guidance to Texas ESCs, LEAs, and private nonprofit schools, and reflects the Texas Education Agency's current understanding of the ESA statute and applicable federal guidance. The content of this presentation is subject to change as a result of further potential information and guidance provided by federal agencies with regulatory oversight of ESA programs. This presentation does not constitute legal advice, and participants are therefore advised to seek legal counsel regarding the information and guidance provided in this presentation before acting on such information and guidance. This presentation will share an overview of PNP equitable services, including the basics, eligibility, PNP forms and application schedules, PNP areas of strengths and improvements, roles and responsibilities of the PNP State Ombudsman, some frequently asked questions, as well as sharing where to find PNP resources to support staff, students, and schools. The PNP 101 Basics. First, in defining nonprofit, the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, defines nonprofit as an agency, organization, or institution owned and operated by one or more corporations or associations whose net earnings do not benefit and cannot lawfully benefit any private shareholder or entity. The CFR also defines non-public. Non-public is defined as an agency, organization, or institution that is nonprofit and not under federal or public supervision or control. The local education agencies are required to provide services which are designed to meet and supplement educational needs for eligible private school students. When it comes to providing equitable services for private schools, you may not supplant, you must supplement. Equitable services must be secular, neutral, and non-ideological for all educational services, materials, and equipment. Equitable educational services compared to public schools, provided in a timely manner, and monitored and enforced by the PNP Ombudsman. The PNP 101 Basics. The ESA eligible programs for equitable services include Title I Part A programs, which falls under the ESA Section 1117, and the Title VIII programs are under ESA Section 8501, and those programs include Title I Part C, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, Title IV Part A, and Title IV Part B. For Title I Part A eligibility, on the PS 3099 private school schedule, the LEA is required to enter data which would generate funding for services for eligible private schools. The poverty data must be generated by using children ages 5 through 17 for both the public school and the private school. Low-income students attending these eligible private schools generate funding either by the data from same source, which is using the same measure of poverty as public schools, such as free and reduced lunch data, the survey with extrapolation, using comparable data from a survey and allowing the results to be extrapolated from representative sample if completed data are not available, proportionality, applying the same low-income percentage of each LEA attendance area to number of PMP children residing in the area, or the equated measure, using two data sources for public school students and apply to the private nonprofit population, or using comparable data from another source, such as tuition scholarship application. Students served must reside in participating Title I Part A public school attendance areas. The LEA and the private nonprofit school officials establish the multiple educationally related objective criteria for services during consultation. Only targeted students which meet the selection criteria are eligible to be served with Title I Part A funding. Poverty is not a criteria for receiving services. For students residing in Mexico and attending Texas private nonprofit schools which receive Title I Part A services, the Title I Part A residency requirement has not been met. Therefore, students are not eligible for Title I Part A services. In regards to a third-party contractor under the Title I Part A program, the LEA may contract with an outside company and provide the private nonprofit school tutoring services. The contractor must comply with all Title I Part A program requirements. The LEA must monitor the third-party services and performance to ensure that it is meeting the requirements of Title I Part A. The contractor must specify detailed services on invoices that are submitted to the LEA, such as the date of services, the amount of services provided, the cost of services, as well as other information. Reasonable administrative costs may be taken from the equitable services amount, and this administrative cost must be discussed during consultation with the private nonprofit school officials. To determine other program student eligibility, for Title I Part C, Migrant, the LEA would provide services to identified migrant students. For Title III Part A, English learners and immigrant students, the LEA could provide services to those students that are identified as either English learners or immigrant students in the private nonprofit school. For Title III Part A, students residing in Mexico and other states are eligible for services if they meet the English learner eligibility criteria and the eligible student attends a private nonprofit school that is located in an area served by the LEA, which also receives a Title III Part A grant. Eligible students' residency is not a factor like it is under Title I Part A. I will share just a few forms and schedules that are related to equitable services. The affirmation of consultation forms are located in Teal ESSA reports as well as on the PMP webpage. An affirmation of consultation form is required to be submitted through ESSA reports for all participating PMP schools. The affirmation forms are due annually on September 30th through ESSA reports. If a private school opts not to participate in equitable services, the LEA keeps documentation on file. In this case, an affirmation of consultation form should not be submitted to the TEA. This is an example of an affirmation of a consultation form that an LEA and a private school would go through as far as the elements of consultation and being able to have a discussion regarding any possible carryover, as well as signing from both parties that they agree with the affirmation of consultation topics. The deadline to submit this affirmation form, again, is September 30th. This is a snapshot of the PS 3099 Private School Schedule, Part 1. The ESA statute requires that timely and meaningful consultation occur between the local school district and the private nonprofit school officials. District consultation with participating PMP schools includes determining equitable services for private school students and teachers. Equitable services are calculated through the PS 3099 schedule located in the ESA consolidated application. Equitable services does not apply to charter schools. Here is a copy of the PS 3099 Private School Schedule, Part 2. In this form, this is just an example of Title I, Part A, and the calculations for equitable services. The LEA would input the low enrollment count for participating Title I attendance areas, as well as the total eligible low-income students attending private schools who reside in a participating or skipped Title I attendance area. The enrollment counts should include only those students ages 5 through 17. PR 3099 Compliance Report is the LEA private nonprofit school schedule. The LEA ESA Compliance Reports is located on the TEA webpage. This is a snapshot of what you may find currently on the Compliance Report Resources webpage. You may locate past recorded training sessions and documents regarding the PNP Compliance Report. This is an example of the PR 3099 private school schedule, which is the compliance report for private schools' equitable services. Part 1, an LEA would indicate the number of private nonprofit schools within boundaries, and if the LEA received Title I Part A funds, they would indicate the number of eligible PMP schools that attended out of the boundaries. Part 2, the LEA will complete if the private school participated in any of the programs and the number of participating schools that actually receive services per program. In addition, the LEA must submit the number of eligible PMP students that receive services for Title I Part A, Title I Part C, Title III, and Title IV Part A. For the Title II Part A program, the LEA would submit the number of participating private school staff that received equitable services under the Title II-A program. In Part 3 of the Program Compliance Self-Check, the LEA conducted timely and meaningful consultation with participating PMP school officials regarding the implementation of the ESA programs according to the Title I Part A and or the Title VIII programs. The consultation occurred before the LEA made any decisions that affect the opportunities of eligible PMP school children, teachers, and other staff. If the compliance status is yes, the LEA assures that it has documentation to show that documents are readily available upon request to TEA or auditors. Some of the strongest documentation are listed under Part 3 as agendas, meeting minutes, emails, attendance, sign-in sheets, and other documentation of timely and ongoing consultation. If compliance status is no, the LEA must use the space below to describe how it plans to come into compliance the following year. Number 2 of Part 3 states the LEA procedures were in place ensuring it maintained control of PMP technology, equipment, and supplies purchased for the Equitable Services programs. If compliance status is yes, then the LEA assures that it has documentation readily available, and the strongest documentation recommended would be LEA procedures that ensured it maintained control of technology, equipment, and supplies purchased for the PMP Equitable Services program. The LEA may have other documentation available. For number 3, the LEA documented the equitable service amounts used and provided a detailed explanation of the equitable services amounts provided to PNP officials for all applicable participating programs. And as you can see, for Part 3, if the compliance status is yes, the LEA assures that it has documentation readily available for auditors and/or TEA. And we have listed some of the strongest documentation that is recommended, such as documentation that the LEA informed PMP officials of fiscal requirements that include the equitable services amounts for at least one private school campus, documentation that LEA shared calculated equitable services amounts by program for at least one PMP school campuses, or some of the other strongest documentation recommended that you see listed. And number 4, it states the LEA documented the equitable services administration amounts used and provided a written explanation to all applicable participating programs. If the compliance status is yes, the LEA assures it has the strongest documentation recommended, such as documentation informing the PMP officials during consultation of the Equitable Services Administration amount and how it would be used. LEA PMP areas of strength and improvement. Some strong areas of strength by some of the LEAs that submitted documentation were those who included documentation of meaningful ongoing consultation throughout the school year. There were also LEAs who shared equitable services, handbooks, and/or program descriptions that they actually provided to the private school and/or have posted on their website. There were LEAs that also provided a detailed evaluation of their program's effectiveness by the use of surveys and other methods, and they included that information not only in their consultation with the private school, but they also included program effectiveness surveys with parents, of those Title I students with parents of Title IV students, as well as the teachers that are receiving Title II Part A services in the private school. LEAs also shared data and reviewed the PMP needs with the private school, and also had a great system of collaboration and coordination of services when providing equitable services with the private school. Here are a few areas of improvements. There was a lack of Title I Part A direct instructional programs for some of the private schools that were receiving equitable services. Title I Part A may not simply purchase supplies and materials. It must be a direct instructional program. There was a lack of LEA program and fiscal oversight. The LEA is the fiscal agent and therefore must maintain control throughout the program and have oversight of all materials and equipment that have been purchased. There was also a lack of ongoing and documented consultation meetings during some of the random validation reviews. LEAs must keep documentation of their consultation meetings, and it must be ongoing throughout the school year. There should not be a beginning and an ending consultation meeting with the private schools. In addition, there was no coordination or collaboration of equitable services with the private school. And then there were some private schools that were not given the opportunity to have an evaluation of their Title I Part A services. As an LEA, it must monitor and evaluate the Title I Part A Equitable Services Program. The most common findings regarding equipment is that the equipment was not always delivered directly to the LEA first. Equipment should not be delivered to the private school. The LEA should deliver the equipment and ensure that it is in a secure place at the private school. The bar is set pretty high for property that is located on site at private schools. So it is the responsibility of the LEA to ensure that they have oversight and keep inventory and tag all of the property and equipment that is located at a private school for equitable services. PNP State Ombudsman. Texas has designated an ombudsman to monitor and enforce equitable service requirements under Title I Part A and Title VIII of ESSA. The ombudsman serves as the state's primary point of contact for addressing questions and concerns from private school officials and local districts. This slide lists a few of the PMP ombudsman duties, providing technical expertise in interpreting, understanding, and implementing accountability requirements for equitable services, providing guidance to ESCs, LEAs, and private schools, addressing complaints regarding consultation and/or equitable services, ensuring all equitable services reporting requirements are met, and developing monitoring protocols. The majority of time, misunderstandings can be resolved by simply providing guidance, use of the statute, and responding to LEA and private school questions. Part of the PMP State Ombudsman support is also overseeing the state monitoring processes and procedures, collaborating with the state fiscal compliance process, coordination with other staff monitoring, addressing those formal complaints as I spoke of earlier, and also consulting with PNP organizations such as TEPSAC and the Texas Private School Association. As a PNP ombudsman, I also participate in the Title I Committee of Practitioner meetings and collaborate and coordinate resources with the Texas Private School Accreditation Commission and Texas Private School Association groups. The complaint process that is submitted to a PNP state ombudsman requires a formal submission. The complainant must document efforts used prior to filing the complaint, such as what process did they use in trying to meet with the LEA and resolve any questions or issues that were occurring. It must include supporting documentation. The PNP complaint is reviewed by the ombudsman, and a final ombudsman decision is delivered within 45 days. I'd like to spend a moment to go back to consultation. Consultation is the cornerstone of equitable provision. It should be timely, meaningful, and ongoing throughout the year. It is the LEA's obligation to consult with PNP schools. While an LEA makes the final determination in regards to equitable services provided, the goal of consultation is agreement, and the LEA must take the views of the non-public school into consideration. I would also like to discuss the goal of consultation. Successful consultation begins well before the implementation of services, establishes positive and productive working relationships, makes planning effective, continues throughout implementation, and serves to ensure that the services provided meet the needs of eligible students and teachers. Now I will discuss a few frequently asked questions. May an LEA set a deadline for PNP school officials to indicate participation? The response is yes. An LEA may set a reasonable deadline, taking into consideration private school schedules for private school officials to indicate their intent to participate. An LEA should provide clear and sufficient notice of the deadline, identify potential consequences for not meeting the deadline, and give adequate time for private school officials to respond. This deadline should be provided to the private school in writing during a consultation meeting. May an LEA impose reasonable deadlines on PNP school officials to meet obligation of funds requirements? Yes, an LEA is responsible for ensuring that title funds are obligated in a timely manner. How should an LEA handle a request from a PNP school to start receiving equitable services late in the school year when it turned down services earlier in the year? The LEA should always have a deadline. The LEA can politely notify the private school official that the deadline that was provided at the beginning of the year has passed and program funds have been allocated to other uses. The LEA must also notify the PNP school official of scheduled consultation dates for the following school year so that if it wanted to be included, it would know what those dates were prior to the next school year. In regards to carryover of equitable services, the LEA must have documented the amount of unexpended equitable services funds and included the uses of those funds throughout the year during consultation meetings for equitable services. The goal is to not have a carryover of equitable services, but there are times when there will be carryover, and it is permissible for an LEA to allow that carryover to be used the following year for that particular private school in the area in which it was intended. How are reimbursements handled once the LEA requests for approval of participant support costs form is completed? Reimbursement is allowed for only a portion of travel costs if attending a faith-based sponsored conference or professional development opportunity. Reimbursement for actual cost of lodging and meals based on Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts unless a local policy reimburses at a lesser amount. An LEA must review program session descriptions that the private school is desiring to attend and determine if it is approvable. You may find additional guidance regarding the TEA participant support costs and the TEA reimbursement guidance at the links below. May pre-K programs located in a PNP school participate and receive equitable services? This is probably one of the most frequently asked questions that our office receives. Equitable services may not be used in standalone PNP pre-K programs for students or staff. However, if a PNP has a pre-K program and any one or more school age grades, such as pre-K and kindergarten, are located in that same building, students and staff may receive equitable services. May a local school district reserve funds off the top of its Title I Part A allocation before it allocates funds for private nonprofit equitable services? No. A district must determine the amount of funds available for providing equitable services prior to any expenditures or transfers of funds. This includes all reservations previously taken off the top of a district's Title I Part A allocation, including reservations for administration, parental involvement, and district-wide initiatives. Many LEAs and private nonprofit schools ask the question, what is direct administration cost? Direct costs are those costs that can be identified specifically with a particular final cost objective, such as a federal award or other internally or externally funded activity, or that can be directly assigned to such activities relatively easily with a high degree of accuracy. If you would like to learn more about direct administration costs, you may view the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, number 200.413. Under TEA guidance, the Title I Part A direct administration cap amount, which may be reserved from the PNP equitable share, generally is 5 to 7% of the Title I Part A administration costs. If that administration cost is greater than 10% from the total PNP equitable share, the district is at a higher risk of a TEA audit. Again, any amount set aside for direct administration costs must be discussed during the PMP and LEA consultation meeting. How does a school district reserve Title I Part A funds for administration of equitable services for private school students? The district may reserve an amount that is reasonable and necessary to administer the equitable services from the Equitable Services Reservation of Title I Part A funds. The district determines this amount separately from the funds needed to administer the Title I program for students in public schools. The administration cost of equitable services is one in which the LEA and the private school must discuss during consultation. One very common question that the TEA office receives a lot is concerning the hiring of private school teachers to provide Title I Part A services to participants. The question is, may the district hire a private school teacher to provide those services? And the answer is yes. If the private school teacher has met state licensing and certification and is independent of the private school when providing Title I Part A equitable services. The private school teacher must be under the direct supervision of the district or the third-party provider. The private school teacher can only be employed for Title I Part A purposes outside of the time he or she is employed by the private school. In this instance, independent of the private school has been defined by USDE as employed for Title I Part A services by another entity to provide services outside any contract or work time with the private school. Now I would like to share a few PMP resources and websites. This is a copy of the PMP webpage where it starts out talking about ESA and the CARES Act, and as well as the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, Equitable Services. On our TEA webpage, we also have additional resources. I would like to point out a new resource that we have that is called the ESA Private School Equitable Services Frequently Asked Questions, which started in October of 2020 as a new resource. You may find the latest document on our PMP webpage. The ESA federal statute for Title I Part A is under Section 1117. And Section 8501, as I stated earlier, provides the requirements for Title VIII programs that you can see on the screen. You may also review the ESA Consolidated Application Program Guidelines, and because it lists equitable service requirements under each title program. LEAs and private school officials may find the latest ESA PMP program guide on our webpage. It provides information regarding Title I Part A and all of the programs under Title VIII for private school equitable services. TEA has identified the ages used to calculate the schedule PS 3099 private school equitable services by program. Under the Title I Part C migrant and the Title III Part A English learners or immigrant children, the ages used on the PS 3099 private school schedule should be ages 3 through 21 of those particular identified groups. for the private school as well as the public school. For the Title I Part A, Title II Part A, and Title IV Part A, the LEA will use ages 5 through 17 for the students in the public school as well as those in the private school. This is the website for the statewide ESA Title I Part A Capacity Building Initiative, as well as the start of the PNP webpage under the same initiative. There are more documents and materials to come. The U.S. Department Office of Non-Public Education has a webpage as well. You may join their listserv to receive direct resources and documents and information from the Office of Non-Public Education. In addition, you may locate the ESA Title I Part A Equitable Services Updated Non-Regulatory Guidance on the ONP webpage as well as the TEA webpage. The latest Title I Part A Equitable Service Guidance is dated October 2019. We are still awaiting an updated ESA Title VIII Equitable Services Guidance that has not been delivered yet. You may also view other documents on the TEA PNP webpage, the statewide ESA Title I Part A Capacity Building Initiative by Region 20, and the USDE Office of Non-Public Education. I would like to leave you with my TEA contact information.